invited to speak on conversational apologetics. But I really want to start this talk just by thanking everyone who's here. Thank you for giving me an audience, and also thank you for the work that you do. I know a lot of individuals in this room. I've really been blown away by what God is doing in the area of apologetics, but thank you for all of your contributions. We need you. Apologetics is important, even though a lot of people don't think it's important. So, as 2 Thessalonians says, don't grow weary in doing good. So, my hope for this short talk is just that I will in some way encourage everyone here to continue the good work in apologetics. It's been a journey for me, and it's one that I still have a lot to learn in, but it's been a good adventure. So, well, let me just begin with an analogy from my childhood. I was born in California, where it does not snow, and I moved here to Colorado when I was still young. I was really enchanted by the snow, and I remember one of my first winters here in Colorado looking out into my parents' backyard, and it was during one of those just spring blizzards, in the early spring when it's just piles of snow everywhere. And there's this privet hedge in the backyard at my parents' house, and I saw these, kind of through the blizzard, I saw these little bright blue specks all over the bushes, and I was like, what is that? And then I realized there were dozens upon dozens upon dozens of these tiny electric blue birds puffed up like little pom-poms, freezing in the blizzard. And I'm a young child, and I'm just very enamored with animals. And so I wanted to somehow save them. I was so concerned about these little birds. So I went out onto the back porch, and I put some food there, some seeds and some bread and some water. And I came back in, and I waited, and they didn't come in. They were still out in the snowstorm. And so I went out again with like a little heater, and I put a heater there, to make it all warm. And surely they'll come in now. So I went inside, and I waited. And they never came into the dry, into the safety. They just stayed out in the snowstorm the entire time. And I remember thinking to myself, I really wish I could speak bird. I really wish I could speak bird, because I could go out there and I could tell them, listen, you're going to die if you stay here. There's a way for you to survive. I had the compassion, and I had the means to help. I had the intellect to help, but I didn't have the communication. We really, really need to be communicators if we're going to be effective apologists. I'd like to submit to you that there are 3 facets of a conversational apologist. And I've labeled these facets the heart, the voice, and the face. The heart is really what's happening behind the curtain. So when I refer to the heart, I'm talking about the spiritual disciplines that we undertake in our daily lives that pour into our conversational apologetics. The voice is more about what we say and how we say it. This is kind of developing the cadence of your speech, really, really picking your words well. And the face is more about what we convey and how we interact with people. Our voice can be saying one thing, but our face is saying something completely different. People know when you're not listening to them, even if you say you are. So we really need all 3 of those facets. But let's dive in with the heart then. So again, the heart, what's happening behind the curtain? Those 3 things. Luke 6:45 says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So I would like to argue that conversational apologetics does not begin in the mouth, does not begin in the mind. It begins in the heart. Again, in 1 Thessalonians 2:4, we read, we speak not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts. And in 1 Timothy, we see the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law without understanding either what they are saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. So really, in the scriptures, there's a definite connection between the state of the heart and the state of the speech. So how do we prepare our hearts? I'd like to argue that the best thing we can do is imitate Jesus, first of all. We're called to imitate him in our spiritual walk, so why not in our conversations? One thing that Jesus was very fond of doing was asking questions. You see that all through the New Testament. Oftentimes, when attacked or when challenged, he will respond with a question in a very powerful way. I like to say that he has a black belt in philosophy. I know that sounds bad, but when I really study his teachings and when I study the way that he responds, I mean, he's really brilliant. And a lot of it is because his heart is so engaged, but he's also just philosophically, I mean, he's amazing. So I think really having the two together can be very powerful. Questions like, whose face is on that coin? Or who then has accused you, woman? Those are responses, but they're question responses. It's okay to do that in conversation, and I found it very effective. Another thing that Jesus did was he kept in step with the Spirit during conversation. There have been times in my life when I have felt the Holy Spirit say, you need to be quiet. You need to shut your mouth right now. And we need to listen when that happens, even if you have a slinger of a response. Time to be quiet. If the Holy Spirit tells you to be quiet and wait. And when you're not ready to speak, if the Holy Spirit says speak, we've got to speak. We've got to open our mouth. So keep in step with the Spirit. Another thing he did, he went away by himself to calm down. I think that's okay to do. I think if you're getting aggravated in a conversation and you feel yourself feel that anger rising, it's okay to take a step back. It's all right to say, you know what, let's meet again another time. I think that when we're training for a physical fight, I studied Kung Fu, and so while I was in China, and he was very, very careful with emotions and always teaching me, if you are angry, you do not fight. You do not. You wait until you're in control of your emotions. I really believe it's the same when we're engaging in a debate. Don't fight angry. Just keep yourself in check. So I'd like to move into a couple personal tips that I've used in my conversational apologetics. So the first thing I'd like to say is it's great to have a skeptic friend. It's great to have someone that you just hang out with who doesn't believe in God. And my mantra is skeptics are friends, not food. It's not about a project. It's about a relationship. We chastise people who enter into a romantic relationship because they want to change the other person, right? That's very wrong. But why is it okay to do that with a friend? I'm not sure if I see the difference. I think it's great that we want people to be saved. That's wonderful. That's the heart of God. We've got to keep in step with the Spirit, again, going back to that. And it's okay to be a friend with someone, and if they're like, no, I'm not ready to accept Christ right now, well, we can't be friends anymore, and then just dump them. No, it's not a waste. Every time you love that person, every time you show kindness to that person, just building that relationship, I think that's wonderful. And how many people here have a skeptic friend that they see on a regular basis? Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's really encouraging. That's by far the majority. And that's kind of rare, honestly, but I think that's great. Paul writes to the Thessalonians, and he's remarking back on when he had gone to see them kind of before they had formulated the church and everything, and he says, being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. I find that really beautiful. All right, so the second thing that I do, engaging the heart, is I season myself with salt. I know that sounds odd, but let me explain. Paul writes in Colossians, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. There should be a constancy in the flavor of our hearts, and a constancy, therefore, in the flavor of our speech. Likewise, James says, can both fresh water and salt water come out of the same spring? The answer is no. If we, in our home life, are constantly cursing, badgering people, if we use aggressive speech, and then we go and transition into a work environment, will that or will that not taint our work speech? I'd like to argue that it does. No matter how hard we try to separate those two things, if we engage in that kind of speech and dialogue in the home, that will carry over into our work speech. I'd like to submit to you that it's the same thing in the church, that we maybe get a little comfortable at church, and maybe we think it's okay to speak very harshly to each other. I've seen that a lot. But then when we go out and we speak to skeptics, I think that can affect our speech when we're speaking to a skeptic as well. I'm convicted on this, and I know some people in this room might be as well, but we really have to have that constancy when we're dealing with each other in the church as well, with our hearts. Just to give you an example, there was a time when I was having a problem with one of the sites that I was moderating for Ratio Christi. There was an atheist gentleman there who was being very aggressive, sort of trolling the site a little bit. And so I contacted another apologist who was sort of in a similar position that I was, just to gain some advice from him, because as Bob was mentioning to you, I'm rather new to the organization. So I said, you know, you've been with the organization a long time. I'd just like to pick your brain. What would you do in this situation? And how would you respond to this atheist who's trolling a website? And his response was basically, I'm not your mommy, and if you can't figure it out by yourself, you should not be an apologist. So, yeah, I was like, never mind. Sorry about that. And then later on on one of the websites that he was moderating, I did notice that there was a lot of aggressive speech from him towards the skeptics as well. So just to say there's a distinction there. It may seem easy to segregate, but oftentimes I don't think it is. The third thing that I like to practice in order to really engage my heart during conversation is learning to listen. So when I was in Oxford, I had this friend named Anna. She was wonderful. She was an artist. She ate Nutella and peanut butter for breakfast every morning with a spoon. She was just flamboyant and had crazy hair. She was brilliant, but I loved going around Oxford with her because she knew everything about the art. And she knew all of these like secret basement places in the old halls that were like 1,000 years old. And you could go down and see all this beautiful artwork that no one else saw. And one day she took me to see some Byzantine artwork. And I wasn't very familiar with it, but I was kind of struck by the portrayal of faces because they looked like aliens to me. The eyes were huge, and the mouths were these teeny tiny little slits on the bottom of the face. And so I asked her about it. I said, I've never seen a human being who looks like this. So who are they using for models? And she explained to me that they really tried to express the righteousness of people in their faces, and that righteous people were people who listened and didn't talk. They were the people who had small words and big ears or big eyes, taking everything in, but not, yammering on. So I found that interesting. There's a trend in apologetics that really bothers me, and it's that a lot of apologists are chatty, so chatty, just talking all the time. Friends, this is something that we really need to change as apologists. It doesn't convey a heart that cares. If our speech is bulldozing over someone, what does that say about our heart? If our speech is totally careless, what does that say about our heart? Maybe that person won't feel as cared for. No fire hosing, as I like to say. It's good to listen. Or as it says in Proverbs, you can't say it any better than this. It says, don't talk too much, for it fosters sin. Be sensible and turn off the flow. So basically, with engaging the heart, imitating Jesus, and then just kind of my three mantras that I have: skeptics are friends, not food; ourselves with salt, and roll with it. So, but let's transition from there into the voice. And just to remind you, when I say voice, I'm referring to the component that deals with what we say and how we say it. So it's really specifically developing your speech patterns when you're in conversation with people. 1 Peter 3:15, probably everyone in this room is familiar with this verse, but be ready to give a response. So apologia in Greek, really geared toward oration, geared toward that vocal aspect. It's obviously very important in the scriptures. But how do we develop that voice? Well, I would like to share with you 3 figures that have really influenced me in my life. 2 of them I knew personally and studied under during my time at Oxford. One of them has passed away, Francis Schaeffer. But let's look at the first, Alistair McGrath. Now, McGrath says when you're developing your voice, that you should always remember it's a corporate affair. And what he means by that is this. It's good to look at the arguments, and it's good to be prepared for that dialogue, because you don't want to answer a question that you haven't been asked. But you also need to look at apologists as people. Study their voices. Study how they talk. Listen to lectures online. He says, let your own approach develop, but be enriched by those others that have gone before. Francis Schaeffer, that is, had a little bit of a different approach. He was dig, dig, dig. That's all he did. He, as some of you may know, was the father of the It's more about digging into an issue than coming to a specific conclusion. He would always ask of his friends, well, what are the moral implications of what you're saying? Or is that really true satisfaction, or is that dishonest satisfaction? Because those are kind of chinks in the armor they're okay to prod there, because there's obviously a problem with that worldview. And he was always ready to share an alternative when asked. So one thing I'd really like to emphasize is it's okay to say, I don't know, as an apologist. A lot of apologists would disagree with me on that point, but I find it very important. There have been times when I have been asked on a Q&A panel in front of a huge group of students a question that I didn't know the answer to and had to say into the microphone, I don't know. But let me tell you that the response was really good, actually, because there's an element of honesty there. And our job is to speak the truth. And if that's the truth, speak it. That's okay. Ravi Zacharias says this, even apologists must know their limitations and be able to refer a questioner to a suitable source. When I read this, I think of my friend. He was a gay rights activist in Australia for years. He was very prominent in the gay rights community. He worked with politicians, really just a brilliant person, brilliant speaker. But he had an aunt who really liked to dig with him on issues that he had with Christianity. And she never gave up. He would come to her with these questions about Christianity that she honestly couldn't answer. But her response was always the same. Well, let's look into it together. And they would read secular books, they would read the Bible, they would read, recent literature, whatever they could get their hands on. And he ultimately came to Christ. And now he works for Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. He has an incredible story. I won't go into all of it, but just to let you know, digging is beautiful. And there's another analogy that comes to mind. I don't know if anyone in here remembers this. This happened in, I think, 1973, when there was a man in Nevşehir, Turkey, who just wanted to put an extension on his house. So he was just digging in the ground in Turkey, and he found the entrance to the lost city of Derinkuyu. And I don't know if anyone here is interested in archaeology, but Derinkuyu is the largest lost city in the world, underground city, at 18 stories deep, I think. So we serve a God who loves to dig, and you never know where a little digging will take you. It's okay to dig with your atheist friends instead of saying, I know the answer when you don't. Another person I'd like to bring to light is Tom Price. He's a little bit lesser known as an apologist. He's more up and coming. He has this beautiful analogy of when you're in conversation with someone, it's kind of like walking down a hallway. And the hallway is full of doors. And you've got to try those doors. Some of them will be unlocked, some of them will be locked. But you have some keys to open those doors. So basically he says that there are 5 keys you can use to kind of open a door and go a little deeper in conversation with someone. The first one, he says, is motive. We have to analyze our motive when we're in conversation, because it's easy to become prideful. As Philippians 1:17 says, we don't want to proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition. That's very detrimental. Or in 1 Timothy again, an unhealthy craving for controversy produces envy, dissension, slander, suspicions, friction. It just goes on and on. But it's easy to get that craving for controversy in apologetics, isn't it? It's very easy to fall into that. It feels good to win. Let's admit it. That feels good to win an argument. But if you've lost the person, you've lost a lot. And it's something I think we should be wary of. The second key that Tom Price brings is prayer. And I've seen this work in amazing ways. In the middle of a conversation when things are heating up and maybe the person or people that you're talking to are getting really aggressive and you feel like, oh, I've just lost control of this, or say something that they were offended and you're like, I didn't mean that, what do I do now? But just prayer, we should be in prayer constantly. It's powerful. You can be in prayer while you're mid-sentence talking to someone. That's the beauty of prayer, and God is there and it works. A third key, ask before you tell. Again, going back to this idea of questions. Jesus asked questions. Francis Schaeffer asks a lot of questions. People see that care when you're asking more than telling. No one wants to be bulldozed over. Another one is to use illustrations. Now, it's great to stay up to date with, current apologetic methodologies and what have you, current literature. That's great. But it's also really important to have our own ideas and to develop our own approach going into conversation and just really engaging with the culture. Did you see that movie, secular movie? Or did you hear that song? Or did you hear in the newspaper? That's great. That's a great conversation opener. And it also, I think, lets people know that you're not completely locked into like the Christian bubble and you can't possibly think of anything that's not like a Christian thought. A lot of people have that view of Christians. But just, engaging with people like Jesus did. Then the last one, he says, use secular examples. I find it really interesting that Paul Greek poetry before he went to the Areopagus to give his discourse. He knew what the sophists were thinking. He knew what all of the Greek gods stood for and what their names. He had studied the culture, and we should do that in our culture as well. But I'd like to pause there again and just ask, what are some techniques that you've used that have worked, haven't worked? Maybe something I mentioned, and maybe something I didn't mention. I'd love to just hear some of your experiences. Thank you for doing that. That's really awesome. Yeah, and just listening to people, it's so powerful. So many people just want to be heard, just want to be listened to. So, it's very powerful. Thanks for sharing. All right, well, let's just look at this last section then. So this is the component I call the face. It's what we convey and really how we interact conversationally with people. I find that face-to-face interactions are unique, especially nowadays as we're transitioning into a more technical age and we've always got some kind of screen right in front of our nose, computer or whatever. It's easy to misinterpret things in a text or an email. But the mood changes in a face-to-face conversation, I found. Not to say that texting and emailing are bad. You can do great apologetics through that stuff. Like Joey and Gregory Perez over here, they've been engaging atheists, the Ratio Christi website for Minds, and I'm so thankful for them that they have a presence on that site. It's just been really great to see them, really asking questions and supporting people, and so that's definitely great. Don't get me wrong, we need that. But I find that things change when you sit down with someone face to face. And there have been a couple times when I've been on an online forum, talking with someone or something like that, and they're really aggressive, and I'm a tough, anti-theist, all religion is terrible, or something like that. And then I'll just say, oh, I see you're in the area. Would you like to go get a coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about your views. And the minute you sit down, everything changes. It's so funny. It's like all of a sudden they're smiling. And they're telling you about their kids and their dog, and here's a cell phone picture of my house plant. It's just like, it's just awesome, you know? People just relax. I would also really recommend food. There's some kind of magical, neurological thing that changes when you're eating food with someone. I don't know what it is. I think there's a Bible verse about that, like sitting down at a table and eating with your enemy or something, but it's really true. If there's someone who's particularly aggressive that you're interacting with, just go out to dinner with them. It'll make a world of difference. I think it's also important when you're dealing with someone to emphasize that it's an invitation. It's not a challenge. As Alistair McGrath says, you can't argue someone into the kingdom, but we can clear the ground and plant seeds. God will confirm himself to others. We can use apologetics to show them the way to him. So it's not so much what you say, but how you say it. And again, going back to winning the person and not the argument, just being engaging and winsome in order to connect. There's also, I'd like to say, a big danger in assuming that one size fits all when it comes to apologetics. That's not true. It's good to know the arguments, it's good to know some of the responses, but again, we're dealing with people. There's one way to God, and that way is Jesus. But there's as many ways to Jesus as there are people. People are not going to go down the same logical path that you went down when you found Jesus. They may go a totally different route, and you've got to be willing to just go with them. Ravi Zacharias says, communication requires words and concepts that do not create gaps, but build bridges. And there have been times when I've been in conversation with a student or a skeptic at a church or something, and I just find as I'm conversing with this person, there's like this gap that's just opening up between us. And I have to stop and think, okay, what have I said, or what have they said, or what happened? What kind of words am I using that are creating this gap? And trying to change that and build bridges instead, build more bridges to that person. Again, showing them that you care, even if it's just listening. Another point I'd like to make is when you're having these conversations, you've got to be ready to be watched. People will be watching you like a hawk, because it's so great to catch a Christian cussing. It's so great when you don't want to accept the gospel. You're like, oh, you said a dirty word. So Ravi Zacharias, sorry, I know I just read a book by him that blew my mind, so obviously my talk is peppered with him. I have little doubt that the single greatest obstacle to the impact of the gospel has not been its inability to provide answers, but the failure on our part to live it out. There's a trap called do as I say, not as I do. It's very easy to fall into. Again, the voice is not enough. We need that face. I don't know if you've heard of Gypsy Smith. He was in the UK, probably not as well known here. Gypsy boy, in and out of the prisons, you know, kind of rough and tough lifestyle. But he ultimately came to Christ. He became a great theologian. But one thing that he said that's really stuck with me is there are 5 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Christian. And most people never read the first 4. So we are the face of the gospel in conversational apologetics. Yeah, get ready to be watched. It's going to happen. Another point, bring it back to Jesus and stay on topic. This is a tough one, but I can't emphasize it enough. We've got to major in the majors. It's so easy to get whipped up in, you know, cosmological and fine-tuning and like the age of the earth and it's young, no it's old, no it's young, no it's old, and like egalitarianism and all of these words that have so many syllables you can barely get them out of your mouth. Like it's good to discuss the theology, but when you're talking with a skeptic, we've got to get back to the basics and we've got to get back to Jesus. It's so easy to get to those, just watching those conversations trail away. And it's hard, but I think it's our responsibility as apologists to stay on target. Ravi Zacharias says it really well. He says, we are to be extremely careful that we do not so over-philosophize that in the end we lead people to a philosophizing faith with no devotional content to it. I've seen that happen, and it's pretty sad. Paul, after he had been flogged and imprisoned and shipwrecked and all of these things, he says this in 1 Corinthians 9:12, we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of Christ. But how often do we do that? How often do we put an obstacle in the way of Christ? That's just an argument that shouldn't be there. So yeah, stay on target. A lot of skeptics, when you get close to the heart, they flip this switch that just switches everything up to the cerebellum. But don't let him get away with it. Don't let him get away with it. Just take hold of the conversation, bring it back to Jesus, and bring it back to the heart. Avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene, says Paul to Timothy in 2 Timothy. No one wants a gangrene conversation. Those are not fun to have. So my last point on this, on really being the face of the gospel, is to be gentle, no matter how harsh the opposition is. The opposition is harsh. I know it is. I know people in this room have been burned, and I'm sorry for that. But we serve a God of healing, and it's our responsibility to be gentle and to keep going. And when I say gentle, I don't mean milquetoast. Okay, you can be firm and gentle. Jesus was firm and gentle. I mean, I got a whip one time, and it was pretty firm. But let's approach people with gentleness and respect. Overall, is the point. And sorry to embarrass, Ratio Christi students, but the students at Ratio Christi at Mines have done this in a tremendous way, and we've already seen students come to Christ because of that. So just building those relationships, not trying to push an argument, but just befriending somebody, being there for them. It's been amazing to see, and it's been my privilege to work with those students. So yeah, as I said, I want to leave a little more time for Q&A. Sorry, I went a tiny bit over, but I'd like to hear from you and some of the challenges you've faced, or questions, comments. So why Mines? I think for 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is a little bit of a personal reason. I've had a lot of friends who have gone to Mines. One friend in particular who was just a dear, dear, dear friend of mine, and a Christian. His dad was a pastor, and he went in on fire for the Lord, it seemed like. And then by the time he graduated, he was not an atheist, but an anti-theist, very antagonistic. And I'm blessed because we've sustained our relationship through these years. Actually, I'm hanging out with him and his wife tomorrow night. Yes, and it's free. We just figured it out so that we can make it free and open to the public, which is going to be great. But please pray for us, because we're still trying to lock down a good venue on campus. If you could pray that we would find a good venue, pray that all the speakers would be able to come, and pray for funding. Those 3 things we really need prayer for April. Yeah, but it will be free, and it's open to the public. So it's awesome. April 27th to 30th. Here, I'll write it here for anyone. And it's called Think Week. So basically the premise is, let's just come and sit down and think about it. Let's just talk about it, because there's so many misconceptions about Christianity. There are so many students I've met who are like, the Bible says that. Jesus said this and that. He didn't say any of those things. None of those things. I'm like, well, where did those things come from? So it's just an opportunity to hear some of these brilliant PhD, top of what they're studying. These are mathematicians, cosmologists, physicists, and these guys are all apologists in love with Jesus. So it's going to be cool. Gosh, yeah, that is such an issue. I know exactly what you're talking about. I kind of picture it like whack-a-mole. Like you just got one down, but then there's another, like, but what about this, and then you've got to the Bible's totally inerrant, and then, whoa, what about this? So, but I find that the truth of God is just like a giant mallet that just smashes all of the moles at the same time, and you just have to be the mallet. I don't know if that makes sense, but when we're the truth, the falsehoods will fall by themselves. We don't have to go one by one by one. And it may take a long time, and it may not be your timing, or it may just come smashing out of the air when you least expect it. But basically, we're called to be salt and light. We're called to be the truth. in the face of deception. And again, that's why the face is so important, just being a person who is truthful and honest. Because maybe on their own time, when their wheels are turning late at night as they lay on their pillow, they'll think, okay, I think this about the Westboro, I think about this about my crazy aunt. But my friend, what's her name again?
Jared.
But my friend Jared, he's not like any of those people. He's different. What's the deal? And they'll kind of by their own self kind of pit those against each other. So I don't know if that's an accurate answer, but for me, I get frustrated when I try to go one by one by one. So sometimes it's easier for me to just focus on, God, how can I be truth to this person right now? And just let you do the rest. So I'm what's called a supported missionary. So any funding that people donate to me, a percentage goes to me, and then a percentage goes to Ratio Christi. I'm working more kind of part-time with them, and then part-time at another job just to actually eat. Because anyone who's really involved in apologetics knows you're not exactly going to be rolling in the dough. Right now, no. Eventually, maybe. It's hard to make it as an apologist full-time, and I love it. If God makes a way, I do. I'm going to have to get really good at writing books, and I'll probably need more professional. I got hippie hair or whatever. But basically, so the transition was a series of transitions. I did my undergrad in biological science, and my focus was on ecology. And then during that time is when I really got involved in apologetics, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know what I was doing. A friend of mine, so in university, we had a terrible problem with students getting drunk and going out and killing themselves over the weekend. Just drunk driving everywhere or killing other people. And it was just a huge issue on campus. And my friend, who had just recently come to Christianity, felt that he wanted to do something about it. So he started a program that he called Life Ride, where we would go out and we would just give rides to all these people. And he knew all the party houses because he had just converted to Christianity. He had been a hardcore partier. He knew where to go, and he knew where the people were that needed help. And we would do that through the night, through the weekend, just to try and help in some small way. And during that time, he would always give them a CD of apologists talking set to hip-hop music kind of a deal that he and his friend were making. They were actually kind of cool. And so people would go home and listen to him, and he'd have his number on him. People would call him, and it was really cool. And sometimes we'd stay up at someone's house that we dropped off, and they'd sober up, and we'd talk till 4 a.m, just doing apologetics, and it was really cool. So that's where I fell in love with apologetics. And then later on, when I was studying at Oxford, people were saying, you can use your scientific background in your apologetics, because this is a huge contention of people that if you have science, you can't have God, which everyone in here is familiar with that. Everyone in here knows that that's not true, but it's still a common misconception. So a lot of people in my cohort were inviting me to go and speak to their friends, and I just found that there was a huge need, and that God had given me the scientific background for a reason. So that's kind of when I really made the connection. I started listening to the Let My People Think on RZIM when I was doing Life Ride with my friend Matt, because that's what he was putting on the tracks. A lot of them were Ravi. And I heard this guy, I'm like, this guy's amazing, who is this guy? And I looked him up, and that's when I found Ravi. So I listened to that religiously, every week through college and through, the economy crash and me not being able to get a job after, going back to the movie theater where I worked as a high schooler. But I was still listening to Ravi every week, so. And then basically, I felt very called to go to China. I think it's important when you feel God calling you to do something that you don't get ahead of yourself, and that we always wait on God's timing, because I jumped the gun and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go do this, blah blah blah, because I had gone to Africa when I was 20 alone, and it was really cool, and so I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna go and do this. But that was a poor decision, and so God really said, you have to wait until it's time. So I ended up waiting for a year working at this movie theater shoveling popcorn. It was really humbling, but I'm so glad that I went when I did, because it was right. So then I went to China. And then that led me to Oxford. He's telling the story. I don't know my story. He knows my story. You should just get up here. Just grow your hair out and get up here. So then I went to Oxford. No, okay, so I was there, and I was listening to this podcast, and Ravi Zacharias came on, and he said, we started this new school. It's called the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, and it's for anybody, or what did he say? Yeah, he said, we're looking for people who are willing to leave. And it just hit me, like the Holy Spirit just, like, this is for you. And I was like, no, I can't go to Oxford. My undergrad GPA was, could have been a little better, let's just say that. So I was like, there's no way I'm getting into Oxford. Are you kidding me? So, but when the Holy Spirit is calling you to do something and you ignore him, he does not give up very easily. So it was just persistently, tugging at my heart. So finally I applied. I don't even remember what I said for some of the questions. I still at that time did not have faith. I still at that time was like, I'm not getting in. So I applied. Eventually I ended up coming back to the States, took a job as a lab scientist, researching human blood cells. So I was doing flow cytometry kind of stuff. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but it's really cool. And so little did I know that application that I had submitted went to the bottom of a stack that was like 2 miles high of applications. I just didn't know the sheer volume of applicants that this program got, and I didn't hear from them for a long time. And I assumed that my application had been lost, or they sent it to China instead of America. They didn't get my address right, but then all of a sudden I got this email like, your application's up for review. I was like, application? Where did I apply to? Like, I don't remember applying for a job. So then, long story short, God made a way for me, which was miraculous. I did not deserve to get into that program. They only accept 25 students each year from all over the world. So the fact that I was in there with such a terrible GPA really said that God wanted me there. Yeah, but it was a great experience. So in undergrad, the research that I did, because I was taking graduate level courses, which is part of why my GPA was so bad, because I was like, I'm just going to jump right in and be ahead on my master's degree, and I was too young, I wasn't ready. So, but the research I was doing was ecological kind of stuff. So I was studying parasitology and how parasites affect animal behavior. Because you can take an organism and infect it with a parasite, and its behavior just flip-flops completely backwards. It's the craziest thing. It's a total mystery. So I was really fascinated with that. So that was kind of my my orientation during my time at CSU. And then later on, my research was really more cellular, and I kind of gave up the ecology thing for a while. But still amazing stuff. So human blood cells, human blood cell behavior. It's really hard to tell what's going on to a cell on the inside, but you can kind of use a sort of molecular telephone to listen in on the conversations happening inside of the cell. And so that's basically what I was doing, using flow cytometry. Some people don't want to hear it. But you know how that goes, because you love militant atheists. So yeah, some people are amazed to say, you're a biologist and you're a Christian? But wait a minute, you've studied macroevolutionary theory, right? You've studied what Darwin wrote. How can you know that this is true and still believe in God? So then you have to go through, old Earth, new Earth, theistic evolution. Macroevolution does not work because of this, therefore theistic evolutionary theory does not work. And you just kind of have to go down that track. But I do, yeah. I have found some opportunities through that. So at one church, I started a group called Tough Questions, and it's for high schoolers. So it's for high school students who perhaps there are questions they have about the church that they don't feel have been answered adequately, or perhaps they're an atheist and they don't know what to do because their whole family is Christian, but they can't believe it anymore. Or maybe they're just a friend of a student. They don't want to come to church, but they want to learn more. So it's in a church, and it's cool because, if an atheist student comes in to have the tough questions discussion. Maybe they'll stay for the service afterwards or whatever. And that's been really neat. But these kids are so smart. I get so frustrated of people looking down on high school students because they think they're too young to think critically. I found them very good at philosophy and very good at thinking through things. So it's more Labrie. I'm not going to sit there and tell them, well, here's the answer. It's more about teaching them to, question, reason together, bounce ideas off of each other. It's been really healthy, and the students have really liked it a lot. Actually, we weren't supposed to continue the class, but the majority wanted to continue, so I'm still teaching that. And then there's another class called Foundations of the Faith. And kind of same deal, maybe skeptics, maybe you were raised in the church but you left the church, or you just have questions about Christianity but you are a Christian. It's for post-college age students. Yeah, so that was also really, really engaging, really cool, and more topical. That's the big question, isn't it? I have a really controversial answer. Okay. I get asked this question a lot. How on earth did you get apologetics into those churches? Churches don't want apologetics, especially for kids. Are you kidding me? Okay, truth. But before I left Oxford, a friend of mine gave me some really good advice. He said, it's your job to serve the church. If you have time and you want to serve the church, you go and serve. You go to the pastor and you say, I have time on Sunday morning. How do you want me to serve? And if he puts you in the children's ministry singing songs and doing hand puppets, that's what you do. Because it's your job to serve the church. There's that idea of authority. Like, God is the Godhead, whatever. But that pastor's there for a reason. You might disagree with him, but he's under God's authority too. And if God wants to change his heart and have you be an apologist, that's great. That's going to happen. And that's something that you should pray for and wait for. But in none of those cases did I go to the pastor and say, I have all these credentials in apologetics. I want to start a class. Will you let me do it? No. I know that's controversial. I know a lot of people would disagree with me. But my approach is, if you want to serve the church, just serve it in whatever way they need. So at the beginning of each of those groups, that includes the Ratio Christi group, at our first meeting, I didn't talk about anything. I just had a notepad and a pen, and I said, what do you want to talk about this semester? What are some questions that you have? What's a question that you've been asked that you had no response to? Yeah, certainly. They knew it was an apologetics group. Yes, absolutely. I built each of those 3 curriculums on that first discussion list of topics and issues that they wanted to go through. So I kind of, categorized things and pieced things together and built this tapestry of a curriculum of where I wanted to go, and then just did the research to kind of build the information around that framework. And that does take a lot of work, but it's great because you know that you're always speaking to your audience. Because there are a lot of things that I want to talk about that I'm really interested in that maybe high schools aren't ready for. Or maybe post-college students, they don't care about that stuff, That's been my approach, and it's worked pretty well. For the Minds one, I went to campus many times before doing anything, and I just walked around campus and I prayed my heart out. I just prayed. I was like, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. My parents came and prayed with me. Students came and prayed with me. My friend from London came and prayed with me. Just so much prayer, because I didn't know what to do or how to begin. Piece by piece, God kind of revealed to me how to approach it. So made a lot of flyers and just did a lot of flyering on campus and put up posters about, hey, we're going to be meeting here. There's going to be free food. Again, with the food. Got to get the food in there. And we had a great turnout for our first meeting. And so people knew what it was about. Some people maybe left in a tiff because they were just there for a debate. Maybe the debates will come later. But right now we're just trying to build a solid, a place where students can come to learn how to defend their faith. So that's how I did mine.